Jack della Maddalena is gonna run through Gilbert Burns. Jack Della vs Gilbert Burns is set to be on the main card of UFC 299. And this matchup is extremely intriguing, as this is going to be JDM's first real test at the top of the welterweight division, and Gilbert Burns is coming back for the first time in a while following his loss to Belal Muhammad, where he ended up tearing his shoulder up. And although I am really excited and I am a huge fan of both fighters, I just think Jack Della is going to absolutely run through Gilbert Burns in this matchup. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA, I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. When you look at Gilbert Burns' career, it's pretty clear that this guy was extremely impressive. At this point, he's been at the top of the welterweight division for some time now, and he was virtually beating everybody out there. He has wins over Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, he has a win over Tyron Woodley, Damian Maia, and many others. And he even ended up having a relatively competitive fight against Kamaru Usman at a time where virtually nobody was able to beat Usman, and also at a time where virtually nobody was able to have competitive fights with him outside of Colby Covington. So it's pretty clear that Gilbert Burns has not only been at the top of the welterweight division for a while, but he's also been extremely impressive while doing so. But unfortunately for Gilbert, after racking up a couple wins against Neil Magny and Jorge Masvidal, he unfortunately ended up losing to Belal Muhammad at UFC 288 in a 5-round co-main event. Now obviously, if you watch that fight back, Gilbert ended up hurting his shoulder relatively early on into the fight, and for the entirety of that fight, he was a one-armed fighter and didn't really have a chance. And that really leaves us to the point we're at today, where Gilbert Burns at this point is officially fully healed from that shoulder injury, and his next matchup is going to be going up against Jack della Maddalena. But a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, why was Gilbert Burns able to be at the top of the welterweight division for so long? Well, in my opinion, it comes down to a couple different factors, but the first factor has to be his overall stand-up game. Now, on the feet, Gilbert isn't the most technical guy in the welterweight division, but he does a really nice job at utilizing what he has. And what Gilbert has is pretty good boxing. He has a decent ability to throw out that jab, he has a decent ability to throw uppercuts, hooks, crosses, of course can switch stances as well, but the biggest thing that jumps out to me personally about his boxing has to be his power. And the fact that Gilbert does have a really good amount of power is a huge reason for why, in my opinion at least, he's able to be so successful. And although, as I said before, he's not one of the more technical guys in the division on the feet, he does a great job at utilizing what he has in order to get by and be effective. But besides his boxing ability, of course Gilbert has an ability to throw kicks to the legs, body, and head at times, although I wouldn't necessarily say he does that all that often. Now besides his stand-up ability, this is really where Gilbert's game gets significantly better, as once he's able to take the fight to the ground, he has phenomenal jiu-jitsu. And if he takes you down to the ground, it's really difficult to not get submitted by this guy. Either he's going to advance in certain positions in order to get closer to submissions, or he's going to advance in certain positions in order to put himself in a better position to finish you via ground and pound strikes. And basically, if you're going to the ground with Gilbert Burns, and especially if you're on your back, it's very difficult to get back up and avoid positions where you're going to get submitted or finish via ground and pound strikes. But if I had to point out a couple things that stand out to me the most about Gilbert's game, I would definitely say his power on the feet and his jiu-jitsu ability are the two things that jump out to me the most. So overall, when you look at Gilbert's game, it's pretty clear why he's been able to be so successful at the top of the welterweight division for so long. But now, let's move on to Jack della Maddalena. So the big difference between Jack Della and Gilbert Burns is Jack Della is currently on the rise. As when you look at his career so far, it's been really impressive. Although it has been pretty short, every fight that we have seen Jack Della so far has been a really entertaining and extremely impressive performance from him. As in 2023, he was able to beat Kevin Holland, which was a huge win for him. He was able to beat Randy Brown via first round submission, which is a huge win for him. Of course, he was also able to beat Basil Hafez, which ended up being a little bit controversial, but in my opinion, I thought he definitely won that fight. And overall, going into this Gilbert Burns matchup, Jack Della has definitely started to build up a pretty long win streak for himself. But now, what does Jack Della do out there specifically that's made him so successful in the UFC so far? Well, in my opinion, I think it comes down to a couple different factors, but the first factor has to be his overall stand-up game. Because when you watch Jack box out there, it's pretty clear that this guy's one of the better boxers really in the entire UFC. He does a phenomenal job at utilizing that boxing style style in order to be effective. And this is something that's actually pretty rare in MMA. A lot of times when you see guys have boxing-oriented styles, it becomes very difficult for those guys to make it to the top of the division. But when you look at Jack Della, he does a really nice job at utilizing footwork, utilizing that really high-level boxing that he does possess in order to keep up with some of the better guys that he has fought and been able to dominate a lot of guys he's fought as well. Because when you have Jack Della in boxing range, it becomes a nightmare to fight this guy, as Jack does a really nice job at throwing those hooks in close, throwing hooks to the body, throwing hooks to the head, does a great job at throwing uppercuts, does a great job at throwing left to right straights, does a really nice job at switching stances if he needs to, and overall I would say the biggest thing that jumps out to me personally about Jack's boxing is his ability to stay technical while also throwing powerful shots in order to hurt his opponents. But besides his great boxing ability, of course Jack does have an ability to throw kicks, although he doesn't utilize it all that often, but the biggest thing I would say in terms of his stand-up besides his boxing is his footwork. Because although he does have great boxing, in order for him to be effective with that style, he's going to need to have great footwork in order to get inside and make his opponents uncomfortable. And when you look at Jack Della's footwork, of course he definitely does have that ability to get inside and be so successful. Now besides his stand-up ability, I would say Jack definitely has some ground game. Of course he has the ability to take the fight to the ground. Now once he does get the fight taken to the ground, he doesn't necessarily always make the best decisions, especially in that Hafez fight. He ended up pulling guillotine a bunch of times when he definitely should have, making that fight a little bit closer than it should have been. But regardless, in this matchup against Gilbert Burns, I fully expect that Jack will not take the fight to the ground and he will not pull guillotine if he gets taken down by Gilbert Burns. But overall, if I had to point out a couple things that jump out to me personally about Jack's game, it would have to be his overall boxing ability and the overall footwork that he does possess. But now let's look at this specific matchup between Gilbert Burns and Jack della Maddalena and get into my prediction. So in my opinion, I definitely think this is a very interesting fight. You have a guy in Gilbert Burns who's been at the top of the division for a long time, and you have a new up-and-comer in Jack della Maddalena who's looking to become the cream of the crop of the welterweight division. And I think this fight is actually a very binary one. I think if Gilbert Burns is able to take the fight to the ground, he's going to have a really good chance of winning this matchup. I think if he can take the fight down, he can find a submission on Jack Della, he can be able to control Jack Della on the ground, throw ground and pound strikes, and grind his way to a decision victory. But if this fight stays on the feet for an extended period of time, I find it very difficult to believe that Gilbert Burns will be able to win this matchup. I think Jack Della is going to absolutely piece up Gilbert Burns on the feet. I think he's going to do a nice job at switching stances at times, throwing that southpaw jab, which historically has been something that Gilbert Burns has really struggled with. I think if Jack Della is able to get into boxing range, Gilbert's not really going to know what to do. He's going to get hit with a lot of big shots, potentially even get dropped, and who knows what can happen from there. Of course, Jack Della can easily find a finish from there, but regardless of that fact, even if Jack isn't able to find a finish, I just think he's going to be too dangerous and too skilled on the feet, and a little bit too much for Gilbert Burns on the feet if this fight does stay on the feet for an extended period of time. So overall, if I had to give my prediction at this point, I definitely would go with Jack Della. I think Jack's going to be able to stop the takedowns for the most part from Gilbert, and if he does get taken down, I could see him getting back up, but vice versa, if the fight does stay on the feet for the most part, I find it very difficult to believe that Gilbert would be able to have all that much success with della Maddalena. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening in this matchup, but I will say I am extremely excited to see what does. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Jack is going to absolutely run through Gilbert Burns, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.